So I guess first of all, I'm not a head of product and delivery for NHS Scotland. I'm head of product and delivery for NHS Education for Scotland, which is one of many NHS bodies in Scotland, which for those of you that work in the public sector, you'll understand that kind of diversity of stuff going on. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life a decade into working on public sector products. I'm going to touch upon the importance of mission as opposed to role and job title, my personal digital leadership toolkit, and the importance of opportunities. And specifically by successes, I'm really going to focus on the learning that I've picked up over the last 10 years. And so I guess, honestly, where better to start than the middle, right? 2019. Okay, so there's going to be a bit of a running theme today about the offices of public service. I thought it was best to start at Whitehall in the first role where I was officially given the job title, product manager. And the product I was looking after was a digital learning product designed to help communicators be prepared to deal with disinformation and misinformation. And honestly, I had the time of my life working on this product. It was workshops every week, design sprints, user research at home and abroad. And it was really the kind of thing where, you know, when you just feel like you're like really bought into the work and everyone is sort of moving in the right direction with you. Of course, there were some challenges with doing this kind of work, and the topic itself was quite dense and remains quite a difficult topic to deal with. But the challenges actually were kind of more in the people space, right? So first of all, the team I was working with didn't have an established delivery rhythm of any sort, and there were no delivery managers anywhere to be seen. So that kind of fell upon me to establish all of those kind of ceremonies and ways of working, which is not necessarily what you'd expect to do as a product manager. You might. The wider unit I was part of was made up primarily of communications professionals, and the small digital product team I was in the minority very much. And so it really did feel like that sometimes. And finally, and this was the key thing I couldn't shake, was that we were working with all these communicators to build this digital learning, which could effectively replace their face-to-face training and delivery. And I just couldn't shake that feeling. And sometimes you'd work with colleagues and they'd be like well into establishing these digital learning products. And other times they'd be very standoffish and say, you know, well, we don't need that. You know, our customers or the people that we work with, they like to be trained. Oh yeah, because you can hear a lot of noise, sorry. So on the flip side, I was given huge amounts of autonomy along with my fellow product manager in the team. I got to properly own the roadmap for the first time. I was really introduced into public sector resource planning, which is a lot of fun for those of you that have been involved. And best of all, I got to start my journey as a manager of teams and people, something I'd been thinking about for quite some time. So far back that it's important to go back to the very start of my public sector journey. My first public sector role was working on products in Skipton House in Elephant and Castle. And fun fact about Skipton House was that it was built for a Japanese bank in the early 90s. And legend has it that when they arrived at Skipton House and realized that Elephant and Castle was nowhere near the City of London, they quickly sold it on to the Department of Health. So anyway, the product I was working on was gov.uk, and at this point the government digital service was still sort of in the earlier days, and you can see that I was employed as a website content writer, right? And when I arrived, I was told that as a contributor to the mega product that is gov.uk, you are not a website content writer, Johnny. You are now a content designer. And that was just sort of really, really exciting. It felt like a new role and something to really get my teeth into. And I guess after an ill-fated spell working with a small copywriting agency, this was something completely new. The content product I was working on, and the use of the word product is really interesting generally as well, because we have content products and we have digital products and all that kind of stuff. I was working with guidance for nurses and midwives working for the NHS screening programs. I didn't know much about screening at this point, but that was about to change. I was about to transform the experiences for screening practitioners up and down the country. Of course, some things were alien to me being new to the public service. I just didn't really get how things functioned, how decisions were made. I just didn't understand it at all. People spoke a lot about GDS, right, about the government digital service as a as of these people over there, but I was at Public Health England, which is an arm's length body, and we definitely felt far away, and so that was quite interesting. So I just didn't really understand how things were being shaken up in the wider public sector. And also, I was working for a new organisation. Public Health England itself had been cobbled together from various other public sector organisations. And this was my first, but not my last, experience of public sector organisational change. I learned a lot. I learned about user needs, I learned about the importance of content design, and I learned about platforms for problems. But this was a time where a real focus was on stopping everyone just having their own website, right? And so we're moving away from everyone has their own website, organizations, departments have their own microsite. And actually, if you're going to be creating videos, then that should sit on a video platform. If you're looking for guidance for professionals, that should be on gov.uk. And guidance for the public in the NHS should be on NHS Choices, which is now NHS UK. So that was a really interesting experience. But let's jump forwards again, and let's jump forwards to 2020. And before COVID hit, I worked in the shiny new Bay Centre in Edinburgh. I moved to Scotland at the tail end of 2019. And I joined the mission to develop Scotland's national digital platform for digital health and care. Now, one of the PMs in my team has a really fun presentation where it just starts with national digital platform. Those are big words. And that is really kind of, it is really quite a big thing to be saying. Oh, we're creating the national digital platform. But, you know, just like him and others that have joined this piece of work, you know, you can see the need for consolidation across the piece. NES is NHS Education for Scotland. I'm just going to point that back out again because I'm going to start saying NES in the next couple of slides. And it's NES Digital Service at this point, which is important in relation to my sort of public sector org change comment previously. And so interestingly though, our strategy for building this national digital platform was to actually build an application, and then while building that application, build the platform. So that application was Respect, the recommended summary plan for emergency care and treatment. And it's a really, really interesting product. Like conceptually, you probably haven't thought about this though, but if you were to have an emergency and you can no longer speak for yourself and the ambulance drivers have come to see you and help you, wouldn't it be really powerful if you had previously been able to share what your preferences and priorities are? And so that's what Respect is about. You know, I really, really bought into Respect as a product in the next couple of years after that. And I think maybe I bought into it a little bit too much, but that's a different kind of story to tell. So as soon as I started working at NES on the National Digital Platform and on Respect, I realized very, very quickly that we had committed to delivering to a deadline that just couldn't be met. And we've all been there before. Someone's just put a line in the sand and said, you know, you must do that by this date. And so we weren't going to meet the deadline anyway. And then March 2020 comes around, and we're definitely not going to meet the deadline because COVID has basically just stripped us of all resources. But those two things had a big impact. But the thing that had the biggest and the longest impact was the fact that there was just way, way too much tension between creating a product, an app, and creating a platform as a product. The team were experimenting with novel technologies for storing health and care data. But Respect stakeholders, you know, clinicians on the ground and members of the public, they just wanted this app to work. They just wanted to be able to capture preferences and priorities and share them with the ambulance crews. And I guess there's so much learning in this sort of space. And the first one is that technology choices are product choices. Often we sort of get told, you know, just focus on the what and engineering will focus on the how. And the Venn diagram is much more closely aligned than that. And so I think I dropped the ball here. I kind of, you know, engineering folks would say to me, oh, we're going to use this to store the data. And if it was to happen again now, I would say, well, do we have to do that right now? Do we have to explore that greenfield technology right now? Could we use something else and then find a bit more time to chip away at using something new? The second thing I learned is that design systems are great. So when I arrived, the app was skinned using some sort of inaccessible UI componentry. And so I sort of took the decision to say we should use the NHS digital design system to do this. And it just took us 2 sprints to switch it over. It's fantastic. And then the final piece of learning for me was that I'm pretty sure you can't build an entire national digital platform by just building one application. I think you need to be taken on board the needs of multiple software development teams. So it's quite interesting. So let's zip back again to 2015. And in 2015, I became part of the Public Health England content team itself, not just on screening, this time on the entire PHE estate on gov.uk. This building in Colindale is another fun one. It's that shape because it's full of labs. My favorite thing about this place, anecdotally, is that the canteen is either full or empty, and there's no in between, because if you work in a lab, leaving the lab to go and get a coffee or get something to eat is a really tricky thing to do. And so they tend to have kind of rituals where everyone leaves the lab and goes to get a snack and everyone comes back out again. So that's quite interesting. The product kind of is, the product's gov.uk, and the PHE bit of gov.uk is what we looked after. This was our bread and butter. The product that I interacted with was the Whitehall Publishing Content Management System, which was in the back end of gov.uk. And that kind of became my operating system for this year. And so we had a really wide remit. The content team was basically an operational team. We worked really, really hard. We were constantly responding to requests. The 2I process, which was the kind of idea that before you publish something, someone else has a look at it, was clearly based on the peer review process that engineering colleagues use. So I really enjoyed that kind of part of the work. But the work was hard, and it felt a bit thankless at times. And, there's only so much optimization of the process flow that you can make. In this role, I learned about user research and the importance of it, information architecture, and actually the biggest takeaway at this point was that great managers really make a difference. I had 2 managers while I was working in this team, and they very quickly identified that I wasn't just interested in doing sort of the business as usual work, but that I was interested in exciting future opportunities. And I was given the opportunity to contribute to the content strategy. So if I was going to carry on down the content route, then that was going to be really helpful for me, but also to work on a quit smoking application. So to work with a team that was building an application and understand how that kind of cross-functional team might work. So that was really, really powerful experience for me. So if we zip forward again, 2015 wasn't too dissimilar to 2021, and we're no longer in the Bays Centre anymore. We're now in this kind of more classic building in the shadow of Edinburgh Castle. Pretty close to Edinburgh Castle though, so that's quite nice. Also, NES Technology Service. So NES Digital Services no more. We've had a reorganisation. Things have changed. We've got a new name. A few things happened in 2021. First of all, I had 3 separate line managers. Having multiple line managers in a year has become a bit of a strange theme for me. For a while, my unit didn't have a head of product at all, and I was supporting the unit as a team. I also made a really conscious effort to do something other than the Respect product, because I found myself being, stuck in this position of being the guy that spoke about Respect, which kind of made me the guy that was saying that Respect is more important than the actual platform, which is not what I wanted to do. So I sort of started putting myself forward to work on other things, work with other teams, get involved at different periods within the product life cycle. So early business case writing, discovery before things have even, different phases, different spaces. And my job started to feel a lot like being about managing people rather than products, working with contractors and managing live services. And that's kind of why it's close to the 2015 experience. There was a lot of business as usual in there, basically. So I think it's fair to say that it turns out that focus is really, really important. Like working across loads and loads of things, when you're not specifically supposed to be working across loads and loads of things isn't brilliant. convincing people that service design is not just a deliverable within a program, but is actually the program. It became something of a bit of a place for me to, something that I just kept on having to say to people over and over again. And then working with a program management office is a different kind of experience for. I'm not going to go into too much detail when it comes to that. In terms of learning, right, I noticed that, I didn't have consistent line management, but then everyone else in the team also didn't. And no one was saying, this is a bit of a struggle. We don't know who we're supposed to be reporting to. And it became clear to me that you have to ask people, you have to say, how are you getting on? How are things going? Some people's communication style really differ from others, so you need to be aware of that. And the final thing was that one of my line managers, and the first and last time that it's happened, was in fact a clinician. And the amount of reflection that clinicians do, it was amazing to me. He was kind of saying to me, you shouldn't be just looking to get 4 or 5 pieces of feedback from your colleagues per year. You need to be getting feedback constantly. And so that idea of tightening the feedback loop in my own practice became more and more important in 2021. So we'll zip back again to 2016, where I worked for 2 very different organizations. I worked for the Skills Funding Agency in Coventry as a content designer, and then I worked for the Royal Brompton and Harefield Foundation Trust in London. I'm going to just say RBHT just to spare us all the time of that. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the buildings. The one in Coventry was very functional, right? Let's just say that. But there is a funny story about RBHT, which is that in the comms team, we were all expected to show face at Harefield, which is in northwest London. And so there was a rota whereby one day per week, you had to go to Harefield. So it was a bit odd. You had to go to Kensington and then get a minibus to drive you out to Harefield so that you could sit in an office in Harefield on your own and just be there in case someone wanted to speak to the comms team. So I thought it was pretty interesting. The products I worked on for these 2 different organizations couldn't be more different. So I worked on the apprenticeship levy service for Skills Funding Agency, which is a really brilliant concept that, organizations that have an annual revenue that's like a high annual revenue are expected to pay an extra tax, and they can get that tax back by setting up apprenticeships within their organizations. A really, really clever idea to improve, the support for apprenticeships in the UK. I was part of a team within a multi-component set of teams delivering a Gov.uk service, and a really fascinating experience. Whereas at RBHT, I was maintaining the website and Twitter account and sort of roaming the corridors, hoping to find opportunities to write some new content on the website. Very different kind of experiences altogether. So I think it was fair to say that moving to RBHT was probably an error. For me, content design and digital comms are not the same thing. But saying that, the Skills Funding Agency was an entirely on-site gig in Coventry, and I kind of didn't want to do that for too long either. So both of these gigs made me realize how important where you work is and who you work with is. So infrastructure starts with people and places. On the flip side, the realities of NHS funding were clear. The computers at RBHT were all desktops, so you couldn't just take a laptop and go work somewhere else. And the majority of the comms focus was on traditional media rather than digital media. Something that was tricky for me because I was hired as the digital comms officer. I learned the ability to zoom out from both of these roles because I was working with so many people that were just focused on their direct delivery. And at the Skills Funding Agency, I had my first experience of working with a community of practice, the content design community of practice. And ever since then, I've been an advocate for communities of practice, whether it's a product management community of practice, a delivery management community of practice. That is a really, really good way to break down organizational silos. So let's time travel again. And in a previous iteration of these slides, I had the sort of DeLorean between sections. But then there were too many DeLoreans, so there we go. It's 2022, and it's my first year in a head of product and delivery role at NTS. I'm still at the Westport building. and health is the portfolio that I am in charge of. And so what does that mean? Well, suddenly I've got a responsibility for a lot of products, like a lot. And not in the kind of way that I had in 2021, where it was like, you should be involved with a few. No, but you're accountable for what happens with these products. There are a lot of acronyms here. I'm not going to explain them all, but just to make the breadth of this clear, NCDS is the National Clinical Data Store, and that's the data platform for COVID and flu vaccinations in Scotland. And VMT, which is the vaccine management tool, is the app that vaccinators use in the clinics to capture that data. So if you got vaccinated in Scotland in 2022, your data was flowing through just 2 areas of my portfolio. As enjoyable as it was managing this portfolio, there were some very real challenges. First of all, putting everything under the banner of health just didn't really work. The products were split across 4 different tech stacks, 2 different cloud providers, and some of these teams had been around for years and years and years. The diabetes product that was on there was released initially when I was still at school. That's kind of the depth of the legacy product that we had there. So, my final issue here was that it's quite tricky to identify where you can add value when you sort of get just given lots of products in a portfolio. So what did I learn? Well, I learned very, very quickly that you can't control everything. You just can't be everywhere all the time. It's impossible. In this kind of role, you need to be able to make decisive interventions to course correct. And the only way you can do that is if you have really, really good situational insight. And ultimately, that means that I had to be able to trust the product manager's work in each of the individual teams. And so this was a real big change for me, 2022, moving into this kind of role. If we zip back again, and speaking of situational insight to 2017, Public Health England have now moved to Wellington House, another classic building just outside Waterloo Station. When I was here, these columns were not visible. It was just covered. There was work that was going on, and no one could ever explain what was going on with the work. So there we go. My enduring memory of this place is that suddenly the South Bank was a very real option for a walk and some lunch, so that was good. But speaking of situational insight, I had returned to PHE and the screening programs, but for the first time not as a content designer, this time as a project manager. The products were a suite of digital learning products, which are mandatory training for screening practitioners, so nurses, midwives, ultrasound practitioners. And it was my job to create a plan to migrate all of the digital learning to a standards-based format, and then work with colleagues at Health Education England to move it across to their platform that hosted digital learning products. And so that's where it used to be. The screening programs had their own website, and that's where it was going to, talking of platforms, if you work for the NHS, you really shouldn't have to go to different places for your training. So now everyone goes to get their training in the one place. The biggest challenges in this space were actually caused by decisions that I myself had previously made. So specifically back in 2014, when I was doing the guidance content on gov.uk, anything that didn't seem to fit on gov.uk got parked on the training website for later. And later, as I was a contractor at that time, was kind of not my problem. Little did I know that I would be the one dealing with it a couple of years later. Digital learning is very much a niche. There's a whole world out there about the standards involved with digital learning, and everyone has an opinion, and each of the screening programs had their own structure, and therefore convincing everyone to move across to a new platform was a really interesting experience for me. On the positive side of things, the senior person in charge of the project didn't get loads of work done, but did an amazing job of communicating what was done and when. And I have to say, this kind of work, which is effectively sort of migration work, delivery breeds confidence. People just want to know that it's on track. And it did really benefit from being time-bound, and I benefited from working with a really small core team of people that I trusted. And if situational insight was important for that role, the next one equally so. In 2023, the portfolios were realigned in this technology service. And I sort of mentioned before that the portfolio didn't really work under the banner of health. And effectively, the decision was taken to split platform from products, which is, I think, a really, really good idea. And since I had worked adjacent to the National Digital Platform since 2020, the NDP and its services became my portfolio. And so the first thing to be done was to bring a bit of clarity about what the NDP offering actually was. You know, technical services, APIs, API documentation, quite abstract concept for a lot of our stakeholders. And so we just did a little bit of work to just make it clear about what you can get from the National Digital Platform. Interestingly, NDP also had to deal with a new digital health and care strategy in Scotland. Whereas the 2018 strategy had explicitly called out the need for a platform, the 2021 strategy was a little bit more vague about that. This created a bit of a positioning issue where everyone thought the platform was doing something different. From this role, I learned that it's really important to ask for help when you're where you can get it. I improved my decision-making process. You know, I still need to make fast decisions. And finally, I sort of learned about the nuances of the language you use depending on the stakeholders you're talking to. So not loads of people don't love talking about roadmaps. They think it's kind of unclear. They do love talking about delivery plans because it's solid, lines in the sand. So I still talk about roadmaps, but I'm just very careful about who I talk to about them. Speaking of maps, back in 2018, after the small e-learning project, I interviewed for and managed to land a promotion into the role of Screening Technical Projects Manager, which is a very made-up job title, but there we go. This role involved a lot of travel, mostly to Manchester and Sheffield, and latterly to Nottingham. And I worked on 3 products. I worked on the product for the newborn infant and physical examination screening program, a product for sickle cell and thalassemia screening, so capturing outcomes. So people get screened, then they are sort of assessed as likely or unlikely, and then they might have a diagnostic test. But something that never gets captured or is really hard to capture is what happens next. What's the outcome? And so a system to capture those kind of outcomes. And then finally, I was part of the team on a discovery for a new breast screening system. So for each of these projects, I took on a different role. I played a traditional project manager for one of them, a kind of delivery manager role for another, and a kind of product manager role for another. And you'll probably realize that that was near impossible to do. You know, you can't do 3 different roles in 3 different contexts. But it was really good to stretch myself, and I got the opportunity to work with 3 different suppliers on each of these pieces of work. And I learned that whatever you do, you need to have buy-in from the beginning, because suppliers will often have a product and they'll expect you to just use the product. So you need to buy them into the bigger piece of work that you're doing. I did a lot of learning by doing, and there was actually so much value in face-to-face meetings at this point. Just really strategically placed face-to-face meetings. You know, not face-to-face meetings for everything, but knowing when was the right time to meet face-to-face. And so now it's time to zip to the very end. 2024, my 10-year anniversary in public service, my 5-year anniversary in Scotland. And 2024 was really about delivering platform services at the same time as supporting major programs of digital transformation. And so major programs are kind of what you would think of as like the vertical pieces of work, something that has like a direct impact on clinicians or members of the public. You know, building an application for ultrasound practitioners, or building an application for the public themselves. And there are loads of these major programs going on at any one time. And so strategically, this seems to be the right way to bring the platform to life. So, hi, major program, looks like you need component X, Y, and Z, or one of these NDP services, or often 5 of these NDP services. And the story I always tell is, you know, sort of 60% of any sort of clinical application is the same stuff: hosting, storage, integration. So why pay for it over and over and over again? Why not use the platform? And that seems to work pretty well. And so the more program needs that I meet, the faster we're moving to service maturity for the platform. And so the final thing in this space is that programs are big and full of governance, which sometimes works counter to the idea of developing common platforms. If a program has its own technical design authority, you're going to have to convince them not to design their own thing, but to use a platform component. Programs struggle to escape from the waterfall model. They like to see big plans, which map technology to business change to whatever the other areas of work are. And finally, if you're working with a program, they're going to expect their program to be the most important program. And it's not an easy thing to say, we're serving 5 programs at once here. In this role, I've learned to instantaneously delegate, always look forward when everyone else is stuck in the here and now, and always try to remember that these competing programs are all doing something for the public good. So, to summarize, and I sort of mentioned these 3 points at the start of the talk, you'll have noticed that I work for several organizations. Many of them don't even exist anymore. They've changed, they've got new names. But the missions that they were all doing sort of still exist. And that's kind of what I've bought into in my public sector journey. So product is sort of my space, but a lot of the work I was doing in content design and project management was product management work. And so the mission, helping members of the public or helping the NHS workforce, they were the things I really bought into, not my job title, not my made-up screening technical projects manager job title, right? And then the second thing is that everything that you've seen on a yellow slide here today forms part of my digital leadership toolkit. And so when people say to me, have you got an idea about how to deal with this thing? I can say, well, I dealt with that back in 2017 or dealt with that back in 2019, and this is how I did it, and this is how it's different from the context. And finally, opportunities are given and taken. And by that, I mean, I was given a lot of opportunities, but also I was proactive enough to take them. And I don't always see that. So sometimes people are given opportunities and say, well, that's not in my job title. I would say in the public sector, it's really, really important to be proactive. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed hearing about my decade in the public sector. Let's talk more about public sector, digital missions, leadership, products and services, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn to have a chat.